All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Comlink Chatter podcast. Today, Scott is here with me, and we will be
Hello.
talking about the canonicity of the Holy Scriptures of the Bible. I'm kidding. We will be talking about Star Wars, specifically the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Um,
It's
all
been a
right.
current topic in a lot of discussion groups, including certain Facebook groups quite recently.
A lot
I
of
mean,
Facebook.
it's been a discussion point, going back when the EU was still a thing, but
Hey,
lately it's still been talked about, which is kind of odd.
would you say that it really started to amp up in 2005 with the Starlog quote? Is that when you think it might have started spiking?
No, I think it was even before then. There was always sort of like the film only people and then the EU fan group, and there were different discussion parts of the forums on the various websites, the fan websites, and starwars.com. So there's always been people that were against the EU, but because maybe they didn't want to read it, maybe they didn't think it met a certain standard. Could be a variety of reasons. I don't want to speculate, but then there's been this other group who are EU fans, and it's not hard to see and understand that it kind of all fit together, at least from 1991 up until 2014, that there was this effort by all the licensing companies to sort of create the lore in such a way that it all meshed together. And this was evident from things like the data bank on starwars.com, the encyclopedias that Del Rey put out, Star Wars Encyclopedia. I think they made a 3-volume one in 2008. These
Yes,
essential
I've got that
guides.
one on my shelf. I've got a lot of those on my shelf.
Right. So, I mean, it's very clear. It's not a mystery. It's not hard to understand that these things kind of connected together. Now, whether you want to call that canon, there's been a lot of people that use that term over the years, but I don't think they necessarily mean the same thing when they talk about canon. So it becomes up to interpretation what your definition of canon is, I guess.
Yeah. So, what is your definition of canon, Scott?
Well, Disney
Oh, sorry.
has, yeah, I
We'll
think
get there.
Disney calls all of their material canon now. So they ended the EU in 2014. And as I understand, all of their comics, all of their books, all of their TV shows count at the same level. And that's what canon is now. But if we're talking about canon of the expanded universe, it was the storylines from the various licensing groups, Del Rey, Dark Horse, West End Games, Wizards of the Coast, whoever had the license, and the material they created added to the ongoing Star Wars story.
Yeah.
So,
So, I agree with you on that. Right here, I have this image of what the pre-Disney hierarchy of canon was. Now, this hierarchy of canon, at least I understand it, is that it's basically who sets the rules, who, if, like, let's say George Lucas made a movie, which he wasn't going to. He said he wasn't going to. He had some concepts that looks like they would have contradicted the EU, but he wasn't going to make them anyway, so it wasn't something they worried about. He, with the prequels, which I don't know, was this hierarchy established during the time of the prequels, or was this after the prequels?
I think this
Do you,
was around 2000, if I remember right. This eventually came up. I mean, they added T-Canon. So
right?
maybe it was later. Maybe it was in the mid 2000s when
Yeah.
Clone Wars came out. But there were periods of time where George Lucas said he was going to create more movies. There was a period of time where he said he wasn't. But the EU, the expanded universe canon that we're talking about, was always underneath whatever George would decide to do. So if George decided to make more movies, the EU would sort of work around it, and that was the
Right.
case for the prequels.
Yes.
So they got overridden, but they adapted. Right, that was the retcons. That was the stories that tried to erase certain mistakes that were made prior to George making the prequels, or figuring out what the prequels were going to cover. So in ways that those stories contradicted what came before, the EU always kind of sort of worked around it, except for the Clone Wars in 2008, where we never really got a resolution of how that actually fits in. But
Right. Which they were wanting to fix it, and that was the amazing thing about the continuity canon, and that's C canon for people that don't know. Now, Marcel is in the chat right now, and he asks probably the most important question. The fan that put together this image here forgot the most important level of canon, and that is D canon, specifically the Star Wars Detours canon. Sadly, we have never seen an episode of Star Wars Detours. And so that's probably why the creator of this didn't include it. But it is very important.
yeah, I forget exactly when Detours was going to come out. Was it like 2011, 2012, I want to say?
I believe so. And I think it was due to the development of that TV show. We got the famous video of George Lucas beating up an employee for bringing up Mara Jade.
Mm-hmm. Which was a sketch that
yes, it was.
People actually take literally, that they can't understand that was
yes.
a prearranged.
Right. You see Seth Green in a room when something like that happens, you got to know something's up.
Well, I've seen posts of people taking that literally, saying, here's the proof that George Lucas never liked Mara Jade. And they're not just trying to troll. They're not trying to be funny. Like they legitimately think that's what happened.
Yeah. It's crazy. You know, how many people's hair is messed up from the jokes flying over them, over their head. But yes, D canon, very important. Someone else says in the comments that canon doesn't matter in Star Wars, especially nowadays with Disney completely destroying the canon. I wouldn't say that they completely destroyed the canon. I don't know. I don't keep up with it as much. But they don't care about continuities, I'd say. Sometimes there's people egos and stuff, because there's a difference between canon and continuity. And so Marcel said,
is there a difference between canon and continuity? I guess there could be. I mean, depending on what you mean by those terms. The problem with arguing all of this is there aren't established definitions to these things.
Right. And a lot of them are just terms taken from other things that are just like, this is like whenever they refer to, well, I guess what is now known as the Holocron, as the gospel, or, you know, it's like they're using religious, like the way that, like the church uses religious texts and, you know, canon.
Except the church doesn't change their canon, though, right? They don't sell it and now have the new owner change their mind about everything.
Sorry, I'm fighting allergies, so I'll occasionally mute. But yeah, they don't change what that is. And like, I would say with Star Wars, especially with the new canon, they use the template of the original trilogy. Sorry,
yeah, that's exactly right. They use the template of the original trilogy. That's the highest form of canon. And then when they sold it, they made the decision, oh, we're going to bring in the Clone Wars too, which they could decide whatever they want to do. They could have brought in the Crystal Star, for all we know, because they own the rights to it. They own the license.
right.
And a lot of the discussion has been what George Lucas said. I mean, George Lucas sold the company. It wouldn't was it 2012? He
Yeah.
sold the company. The EU continued on. They at least wrapped up the projects that they had in development. Came out, up until April 2014. As we all know, they decided, okay, we're going to end all the new stories that we release after this point aren't going to default to being EU as they used to be. Everything before that sort of defaulted as EU, and there were some EU stories that continued on after that. The Old Republic MMO. There were things on the Star Wars blogs website, Skywalker's, Lone Wolf, Supernatural Encounters potentially, but that never released. I mean, we might talk about that later, but there are certain things even after 2014 that were technically EU, Marvel 108 amongst them. So the story continues. Now, you talked about the holocron. You mentioned that. Is that still being updated? Does Disney, Lucasfilm still care about that? I don't think we have any reason to believe that still exists anyway. So that sort of begs the question, is the EU still a thing? Like, if they decided to resurrect it and created new stories, how would they track that? Or could they track it? Could you resurrect the holocron?
I'm sure they have. If they don't, if it's just a file that's saved in I think they use File Manager or something for the holocron, File Master or some program. I'm sure they've got it somewhere. I don't know if they continue to update it. Like, for instance, the Old Republic. I don't know if they'd update it with that. However, I do think that the Old Republic might have a story archive for specific Old Republic things. And if they wanted to go, hey, we want Del Rey to make novels of your game again, they could just take those stories and put them there. I don't think it would be very hard.
Yeah, I would think that in order to be consistent with their material, that they continue that MMO story, they would need something at least internally to sort of track that, to make sure that they aren't overwriting their own stories. So now, does Leland Shee, who I guess is still an employee at Lucasfilm, does he track that? Or did he get rid of it? And I assume all his focus now is on the new canon. Right. So that's his primary goal.
Or maybe he just took it and added new canon to it, and it's some weird hybrid of everything Star Wars. Because George Lucas, though his word was treated as, hey, this is the highest form of the hierarchy of canon, he still went to the T canon, C canon, S canon. Like, he went to those sources to pick stuff and put it there, just like the new canon team wants to pick things from the EU and put it there. They probably just asked Leland, like, hey, I need a guy like this to do this. Oh, you're
talking about like Ayla for episode 2 and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if those were necessarily his ideas. I mean, opponents of the EU would say, well, they just happened to be in episode 2. It wasn't really George's idea, right? He just gave the green light. Somebody else might have suggested that idea. But, George, he owned the company, right? But he delegated the licensing arrangements to other people, to other employees. Yeah. And this is ultimately what they ended up doing. So regardless what George said or what George thinks, it really doesn't matter in the end, because he delegated those responsibilities to other people.
For sure. We've got a few comments here. Marcel says, George's behavior is over the top in the Mara Jade video. That is,
It astounds me.
It astounds me. Sorry. It astounds me that anyone can take that seriously.
I mean, there are some special people out there in the comments of some of these groups,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to fans of Disney that hated the EU. And even before Disney bought the company, there were haters of the EU. So that's nothing new, but it seems to have been taken to a whole nother level lately.
Right. Now, there are a lot of people that I've interacted with in forums and different things that are very much casual fans of Star Wars. And by saying that, I'm just saying they're big fans of the movies. Because, well, let's just say I like to engage with new canon fans.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, well, as someone that is really invested in the history of the IP in this way, like going deep, like I want to know, okay, what did the story group think about during the 90s? You know, someone just watching the shows doesn't care about that. George Lucas probably didn't care about that. But I'd say I'm a bit like I want to know, okay, what does the story group think now, you know, about some of the
Right.
different things. But
And I think with mainstream Star Wars fans, you know, I'm a fan of the Star Wars Unlimited card game. I play it quite a bit. And there's a lot of Star Wars fans. They know EU material, but they don't get so bent out of shape of what's canon, what's not, and is Kyle Katarn still a character that counts? Like, is he still an official character? They don't really care. It's all kind of the
right.
same thing. And I find that's the case with a lot of the role-playing games too, is even the Fantasy Flight guides that came out around the time of the decanonization. It was kind of a mix of like new canon and old, like Rebels and Rogue One kind of mixed in with the pre-established lore of the EU. And that's how they created their stories, because that's what's familiar to them. There's no need to say, delineate certain rules to say, oh, this counts. You can't use your story to write, anything related to Dark Empire, right? That's off limits. That no, they didn't do that. It's like it's open. You can make your stories how you want. There's no rules or points of delineation where you can't cross this line, right? This is out of bounds.
In the comments we have this person says, I'm still mad that we never got Star Wars 1313. George Lucas told them to make a Boba Fett game during Revenge of the Sith. Yes, I would be curious on this probably multimedia project, which would be the Underworld. That's kind of a niche that I like to really get into. Anytime there's something news coming out, which is interesting because there was this whole like resurgence of like the Underworld with the scripts, because who is the producer? Rick McKellen spoke about it on the Young Indiana Jones podcast. And so everyone started talking about the stuff he talked about. Of course, we already knew about this from other interviews back whenever it got canceled. But it's interesting that all came out. And then a few weeks ago, we just got the announcement that they are making a Tales of the Underworld miniseries on Disney Plus. Of course, it's not the most interesting. It just follows Asajj Ventress during the Dark Times and Cad Bane, so it's just another spinoff of the Clone Wars. Nothing as interesting as what the original synopsis of Underworld was, but I kind of wish we had gotten a fleshed out Underworld.
Yeah, I mean, we can only really speculate what the story was going to be about. I mean, we were told it was going to feature Boba Fett, and that was the thing at least I was looking forward to, and I think a lot of sort of mainstream Star Wars fans were looking forward to after Revenge of the Sith came out. That the next big thing, the next big project in the works from Lucasfilm, now that they weren't going to make any more movies, was going to be this live action TV show, Underworld.
Right.
And it turned out that they decided to do more Clone Wars in 2008. And I thought, man, we already got a Clone Wars, micro series, and then we had all these comics and novels. Like, why are they doing more Clone Wars? But I guess they wanted to do a feature movie, and then we got one season, then we got a second season, and third season with the Return of Darth Maul, and it just never ended. Like, we just got like so much Clone Wars, and I think people were tired of it at a certain point. Some people love the Clone Wars because some people, that's what they remember. That's when they became a Star Wars fan. But for me, it was just like, when is this thing going to end? Because from the very beginning, we saw, well, this doesn't match up continuity wise. What are we going to do? Like, what's the explanation of how they're going to retcon this? Because the novels took into account the Clone Wars events with things like Mortis, and they didn't mention Ahsoka so much. I mean, a little bit in the Clone Wars tie-in novels, like Wild Space. But it was established in things like the Essential Atlas, the Essential Guide to Warfare, that the full-only Clone Wars series is like fully integrated into the EU, and we got the T canon level that you showed earlier. But we never really got an explanation, and people were asking Leland Shee, who was active on the forums at the time, hey, what's going on with this? And he's like, yeah, guys, we understand it doesn't really match up continuity wise, but we're going to give you an explanation. Just wait till the show's over so we get sorted all out. And by the time the show ended, of course, they had sold the company, or the writing was on the wall that they had sold the company, and we just never got it. And people nowadays kind of forget that an explanation was forthcoming, or at least promised, and never did.
Right. Which I actually, since you brought up, like, why did they continue to do Clone Wars when there was already the micro series? Something I learned that I found really interesting was that George Lucas was a huge fan of the micro series, that he wanted to do more of it. And so he didn't really have his hands in that. But him and his son loved watching it. And so that's why we got the Clone Wars. But who he wanted to run it was the guy that made the first 3 seasons of the micro series. And so it would be interesting if he had taken that job opportunity to continue the Clone Wars, what it would look like, because it would probably be just more of that.
Yeah. I think there's only so many stories you can tell in that time gap, because they tied it down to like the month, and in some cases the week of the Clone Wars. And there's only so many years between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith where you can tell stories. It's sort of like the classic era between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. There you have 3 years, but it's like the characters don't even have time to use the bathroom, right, in between stories. They're just on a bunch of adventures, and it's the same characters. So I mean, that's great. That could be an excuse, though, as well, that something wrong happened with Underworld, like it went over budget, or it turned out it wasn't going to be feasible, and he's just saying that because that's ultimately what they decided to do, right? So you can only speculate what he meant by that, if he was being sincere or not.
That's the thing with quotes from George Lucas. They're all speculation.
Right.
Because, he'll say one thing in the 90s, like his foreword to Splinter of the Mind's Eye. He'll say, this story is not just for me to tell, it's for other people to tell. And then people take that as, okay, he's all for it, but like, it's not his story. We already know that. But then he says it again, 10 years later, and people go, he never saw it as canon. It's like, what? But, I mean, it's all speculation. Like, he's a guy that changes his opinion, so we shouldn't take his word for canon so much.
Right. And what he meant by canon is different than the canon that we talk about for the EU, right? Well, if he didn't consider the EU canon, like, and he doesn't consider anything in like the Star Wars Encyclopedia to be things that actually happened, well, that's fine for him. But the fact is, his company authorized this to be written, and he sold these, and he made money off of it. So it ultimately happened. You can't change history, right?
Yep.
So this stuff is not, it's not a myth. It actually happened, right? The stories are myths, but the actual stories were sold and fans read them, and they had a
Right.
vested interest in it. So when it got canceled, it's reasonable to see why they got angry. They got upset about it.
Yeah, you paid money for it. Hey, if they concluded it, I'm sure people would be hurt for it, but I think there'd be less issue about it. Like if they did 2 more books or something, just to wrap it all together, or a trilogy, or I don't know. People would still have an issue with it because I know there was some controversy with like the Troy Denning verse. I haven't gotten there yet, but
Well, there's a lot of alternatives of what they could have done. They could have, on the one hand, created films. They could have had movies that didn't in any way interact with the expanded universe. They were going to just do
right.
whatever they wanted. But it didn't, like, you could have had the EU try to explain that and try to incorporate those movies. You could have had the EU just ignore it and do its own thing and continue on in its own direction. There's a lot of things they could have done besides what they did. And that probably would have got us to a different place than we had now. I think part of the big reason fans got upset is the news that no further novels, even novels that were in the works, like Sword of the Jedi, weren't going to come out, and those got canceled. So had we got those, I don't think anyone would necessarily be upset with the new films or be an anti-Disney hater, right? Unless the quality of the books went down or something else, and that's possible. But again, that's all speculation. We don't know
Right.
for sure what would happen.
Yeah. In the chat, we've got, isn't Timothy Zahn still part of Lucasfilm? I mean, he's still paid to write books, or at least he was. He wrote 6 books, which is wild. 2 Thrawn trilogies. I've not read them. Have you read them?
I read the first trilogy. Yeah, the first new trilogy, which is fine. I mean, he writes his books sort of from the same perspective that the Zahn perspective, the Zahn universe, right? So he has the Chiss ascendancy in there the same way it was in the EU. A lot of the same characters from the Outbound Flight novel, and that's the way he decided to write. Not too dissimilar from James Luceno when he decided to write Tarkin. He used a lot of the same characters from Dark Lord, the Rise of Darth Vader.
Ooh, really?
Yeah.
So I read Tarkin before. So right now I'm reading Dark Lord, or I guess rereading. I think I did the unabridged like way back, but I didn't read Labyrinth of Evil or Revenge of the Sith. And so I like it now reading it as the trilogy. So I might have to give that a reread once I catch up with some things.
Yeah, Tarkin's pretty good. It's one of the better new canon books. I think in general, the first few were kind of okay. A New Dawn was pretty good. Lost Stars was a pretty good book, sort of on the same quality level as the last couple of EU books. And then the first weird one was Bloodline. I felt like Claudia Gray didn't do a very good job with that one. Some people liked it, but after I read that one, I decided I don't know if I'm going to decide to read anymore after that.
Yeah.
I read a couple of the Zahn books, and I think after the third one, I was like, okay, yeah, this is Zahn just kind of doing his own thing.
Like always.
You know, it's more Thrawn, but Thrawn's the kind of character, it's kind of like Boba Fett. You can overuse him, and the mystique of the character sort of gets diluted to where he's not very interesting, where you know everything about him now.
Does Thrawn have the most, for adult novels, does he have the most solo, like is he the character with the most solo books? I'm trying to think, because there's Thrawn, the Thrawn trilogy, with the title name Thrawn, and then whatever it is, because we got like an Obi-Wan solo book. We've got a few of
Yeah.
those.
I mean, technically, we do have 2 Han Solo trilogy. We have the Han Solo
That's true.
trilogy
That's true.
by Crispin, and then the Brian Daley
That's true.
trilogy.
That's true. Yeah, I forgot about that.
We also have the Corellian trilogy, which is essentially a third Han Solo trilogy, or the Solo family.
And then we also have, I think, Honor Among Thieves, and I might even say Scoundrels. I don't know, at least from the synopsis, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, fair enough. I didn't think about those. Oh, look who's in the chat.
Talking about true canon today. Well, I don't know what is true canon. That depends.
What is true canon? That is the question. It doesn't matter, really.
No, it doesn't matter because it ended.
Right. What matters is continuity, I would say, because what good is a canon like, oh, these exist in the same universe, but like could have that through line, at least to me. The expanded universe was considered a parallel universe to George Lucas's movies. Yes, that was the Starlog quote that we talked about earlier, which he's been back and forth about it because, time changes people's opinions. He was talking about it on an interview that he considered like the number of characters in all of Star Wars, and he used a really big number that included the characters from like the Essential Character Guide and all that stuff. And then he talks about the saga and different stuff there. But he might have just been doing that to sell the company and been like, oh yeah, there's like so many characters, because he thought apparently it was bigger than Marvel.
Well, there's a lot of material. There's a lot of ideas out there, and all of that material has money-making potential when you sell the company. They're very protective of the rights to these. And just ask, well, I guess you can't ask Tom Veitch about it, but it wasn't easy writing for the Star Wars universe, especially when the EU first started. They sort of did a lot of the authors dirty. Kenneth Flint took advantage in some cases of their work, and we're very protective along the rights to these stories. So it's difficult.
Yeah. Let's see. The Filoni-verse. Yeah, that's usually with I'd say that's kind of a continuity type of thing. He wants to have a certain continuity, Dave Filoni does, and he wants to stick to that, just like George Lucas. Except whatever.
I don't think Filoni even cares about continuity. He just tells whatever stories he wants to do.
They're campfire stories, you see, Scott. Yeah. They're all campfire stories.
Right.
This is pretend.
He's not a continuity-minded person. He just gets paid per episode, and he wants to create whatever he wants to create. Sort of like Zahn, right? He doesn't care about the established continuity outside the books he wrote. So they're two birds of a feather, Filoni and Zahn.
Goodness, Brendan, you're putting so many comments. You just joined the chat. No,
yeah,
just hop on.
You have the link.
Yeah,
check the Discord.
Where are we at? Canon is more than personalized than ever before. Yeah, I guess. Rewind 2 decades. There was a firm answer. There was, and then there wasn't. Was there? I don't know. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, it depends what time you're talking about. Continuity changes, canon changes, and that's what was so frustrating. Is certain things were brought in. I don't think anything was taken out too much. I mean, in a way, like the Jedi Prince was taken out when it was first written, because they didn't want to have 2 weddings of Han and Leia. So that sort of got shelved in favor of The Courtship of Princess Leia. And then eventually they decided to bring it back in, and the elements where it contradicted, well, they just said, oh, those are S canon. Those are
Yeah.
secondary canon.
Today it seems like a choose your own adventure. Yeah. Oh, do you have a comment on that?
I don't know, because it I don't really follow the new stuff. I mean, there's so many TV shows. Most of them seem to be flops.
Yeah.
I don't really see a lot of benefit for the reader, the person that's interested in like novels and comics. If I were interested in that stuff and following the new canon, I think I would be very frustrated.
Yeah. Which I feel like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the books and comics people are dabbling in legends more. I don't know. That's just kind of a shift I've been seeing. Like, they'll still keep up with the new canon, and they still enjoy it and love it. But then they're like, ooh, I like this too.
That's a good point. I've seen a lot of people that do podcasts or reviews for the new canon books and comics. Whenever there's a lull in stuff coming out, where they'll take a break and go review some of the old expanded universe, sometimes for the first time, or sometimes they said, yeah, I read this a long time ago, but let me read it again, see if it still holds up, see if I'm still interested in it. That's quite common.
A lot of people I see will have like, oh, hey, you like this Disney thing? You really like this? You really like Skeleton Crew? Oh, you like to follow kids doing this? Well, why don't you read Galaxy of Fear? That is tonally similar, or a more Goosebumps approach to it, or different things like that. Or oh, you like Andor and Rogue One? Well, why don't you read the Dark Forces series, or something like stuff like that. Like it's kind of like whenever a new Marvel film comes out, you see a lot of people go to the source material, and yeah, like
it sparks interest in other things.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said, though, for just most people are going to follow the newest big thing, right? The thing that's relevant to today's discussion. I mean, there's not a lot of Star Wars fans now who would openly discuss the Crystal Star, right? That's sort of a niche, something that happened way back when. So I can understand that they're just going to follow what the current stories are, because that's what's in development. They don't really know how that's going to end up. They're on their edge of their seat trying to figure out, okay, is their favorite character going to survive? What's going to happen? It's fun to speculate about those things. Yeah. So unless you're reading the EU for the first time, and don't necessarily know where it's going to go, which is hard to do because that information is out there. I mean, it's hard not to be spoiled about these stories. I can see why you would avoid that, or think it's not as important or as exciting just because you know where it's going to end up ultimately.
Right. Let's see. Oh, so I actually, I think we had talked about George Lucas's involvement, or whatever it is, with TCW and like the original Clone Wars and stuff. I've been watching a video. I've been recommended. There's a guy on YouTube. He talks about like the behind the scenes of film, and like I think there was an outline released of the 12 Star Wars movies that George Lucas had as an idea, and so of course that fluctuated through time. But there was an interview in like the 70s where George was like, I want to make something and then let other people take control and just go to the movie and watch the new Star Wars movie. After that, of course, we know that he took the more director, like be behind the director's shoulder or directly involved approach. but I think he took that approach that he had and that mindset for the other properties. So like, the Clone Wars, original Clone Wars, occasionally TCW, and then the expanded universe. He might give a little bit, but then, he's off doing his own thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the phrase he used later on, probably not in the 70s, was let other people play in the sandbox, right?
Yeah.
Let other people have at it, see what stories they were going to tell, while he and his company reap the rewards.
Yep.
So it's a win-win. Someone else gets to tell the stories, do the creative work, and he reaps the benefits because in the end, he came up with it. He owns the company. He holds all the rights to it.
Yeah. People like it, so why not still have it? R.I.P. Tom Veitch. Filoni canon is non-existent canon. Filoni continuity is lack of continuity. I don't like how people claim that Dave Filoni is the savior of Star Wars. Yeah, man. I could care less. Come on, Brendan. Dave Filoni is no savior for anything.
So was Star Wars in trouble in such a way that Dave Filoni had to come in and save it? I don't know how people would argue that he was the savior of Star Wars. Like, what's the rationale for that idea? Do you know?
So TCW is the best Star Wars. The prequels, it saved the prequels. That's the idea that they have. And so, no, the prequels. And so the sequels came out, terrible, garbage. If Dave Filoni did it, he'd do it so much better. So that's the wishful thinking there. And so, I think Rebels came out at the same time as the sequel trilogy. Yeah. And people, even me, I got behind the Ahsoka versus Vader more than I got behind Kylo Ren versus Luke Skywalker. I don't know. That was just me at the time. And so just because Rebels was, I guess, a little bit better than the sequels, people are like, get this guy in charge, I guess. I think it's the fondness of TCW that made people think he's the one that needs to save it.
You know what I think would have saved Star Wars is a lack of oversaturation of the product. We didn't need a new movie every year or every other year, or a TV show, every year. I think having that in your face, less is more in a lot of cases with Star Wars. When you try to sell something, every single week, every single month, you're just not going to, it's not going to work out for a mainstream audience. It's different for comic books and novel readers that sort of buy up everything, but that's a smaller market. That's a more niche segment of the population that's going to do that. And you have different authors working on that, right? So when you have a trilogy, you better tie down the director you want, the writers you want. You can't just have people coming in and out and having creative differences that will compromise the quality of the product you're trying to make. And I think that's what happened with the sequel trilogy is they had no plan going into it, and they thought, oh well, it's Star Wars, it's going to work out anyway, and you ended up with sort of a hot mess. So.
People say that the sequels, they made money, but there's a reason we've not had a Star Wars movie in 6 years. Mm-hmm. There's a reason of that.
Smart move.
I
think that was
it was smart. They started to tell once Solo came out that, this is a bit much. And so, of course, they already, after that, they just had one more and they did it. And then it was then it's been over, and it's been so hard for them to make another one. But TV shows also, they started to milk the prequels.
I think even with the TV shows, they don't really know what they are going to do. There's no
No.
plan going into it. They know certain scenes. They want a crate dragon on Tatooine. It wouldn't be cool if they fought the Tusken Raiders. Yeah, I mean that's okay, good
Yeah.
scene. But a show needs more than that. You need
Right.
a through line. You need to be invested in new characters, and they need to develop, and there needs to be an interesting story where people are sort of speculating on where is this going to go next. And I just don't see that with today's Star Wars. I don't see people on the edge of their seat just man, is this guy going to survive this episode like we were with the novels. I was constantly wondering and speculating where New Jedi Order would go, or where Legacy of the Force, where that would end up.
Yeah. There's some stuff. See, it's almost like with the new canon, there's a bunch of separate continuities from different creators. So like you've got the Dave Filoni, people that are fans of him, which is fine. They're looking forward to what's going to happen. Is Ahsoka going to be with like the ones or whatever, like the Mortis ones, which honestly doesn't go anywhere.
No.
It's just it's really just a cameo fest. Like that's the excitement for Ahsoka's season 2 is he's coming back, Hayden Christensen's coming back. Or we're gonna get live action Clone Wars. Obi-Wan's gonna be there. Padme might be in it.
I've had enough Clone Wars for 3 lifetimes.
Right. There was enough Clone Wars with the multimedia project. I feel like there might have already been too much with that.
It's a never-ending story.
Yes. If anything, what they should have done was just gone, the Clone Wars is 5 years long. Because that's what it feels like.
Well, you see this wormhole, this black hole sort of warped the Star Wars time and time stretches where, according to relativity, the Clone Wars is longer than any other period in the Star Wars universe.
There we go.
That's their explanation. Leland Sheet, you should have went with that.
Man, perfect right there. Let's see. Let's keep up. Brendan does not follow the new stuff.
Shocker.
What? The only exposure he gets to the new timeline is what I tell him. Yeah. I tell you the highlights. I can't stand Canon. You're a purist to the end. TCW didn't save the prequels. No, it made it worse. I mean, yes, you're right. Sorry. On the EU Timeline website, there's an interesting project by the author named Robert Mullen, the creator.
He was on Monster Quest.
To fuse EU canon with Disney's. Yeah. Okay. That's the one canon. I think Matt's talked about that before.
There's been a lot of creators, mostly timeliners, like Robert Nolan's a longtime timeliner, that tries to mesh the stories together. And Joe was going to actually do an article on the Star Wars blogs when Rogue One came out about how Rogue One sort of works within the EU continuity and how you can change the chapter order in things like forget what
Death Star
is that Death Star. And he later did with like the Solo movies, how you can change certain chapter orders in the Paradise Snare by A.C. Crispin to actually have that work. So he can make something fit where you wouldn't think they'd be able to fit. And I have confidence that the EU, if they decide to go that route, they could somehow make some explanation for the sequel trilogy or any of these standalone films to make them work. Maybe
Right.
that wouldn't have affected the EU story going forward, but they could have had some explanation. Oh, this is how it fits in an alternate, sort of way.
I
And
I I think if they kept the continuity, they could have done a better job with it. Like if they just like the EU people came up with like some sort of outline of do's and don'ts, they could have easily have followed something like that. Even if like the Solo and Rogue One, like because I talked to Joe about those two, because I enjoy those two movies. One of the uh, catches with Solo was the gambling for the Falcon. Like
right.
that was the only thing, and I
Yeah.
was like, how do you know that that's not the first time they gambled for it? What if that was a different time? Just
Well,
my wild thinking.
they did gamble like way too many times for the
They did a
Falcon.
lot for that, and it's like, how do you know that that wasn't the one that was described in the
Well,
EU?
it's pretty clear. You can kind of tell from the film that that's the
Yeah,
first time he won the Falcon. And it occurs on like a jungle planet. There's like ivy in the background of that
yeah,
scene. And he obviously, in the expanded universe, he wins the Falcon on a tournament on Cloud City. But you could say that there's this room on Cloud City that sort of looks like a jungle, and that's really where that happened.
kind of like in Star Trek, the little rooms.
Sort of squint. Yeah, you could sort of make some explanation. And I think the reason why it sort of works is it was sort of based on ideas that were already in existence in the expanded universe. Same
Yeah,
thing with Rogue One. I think that
yeah,
story is largely based on a lot of bits and pieces of EU material sort of put together and created in a movie.
yeah.
Things like the radio dramas where the Death Star plans, and like it's Leia's mission to take the plans from the rebels on Tapwara. Well, it's not Tapwara, it's actually Scarif. But it's the same. It's essentially the same story.
Which the EU, and something really great about it is it could just say, well, it could pull the certain point of view, or these other people call it this, because that's how it is in real life.
Yeah.
Like it takes a realistic feel to it with things. But yeah.
I mean, we got a lot of wacky stories in the EU. I mean, we got stories where you, as a character, are in Episode 1 alongside Jar Jar and Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
That's actually a thing. So I have pretty high confidence that they could find some way to say, yeah, these movies exist in some form. It may not change the story or the direction that we're going to take with the expanded universe anyway, but they could make a way where there's an explanation that these movies did exist, or this TV show did exist in some way.
So you're saying that I'm canon to the EU?
If you are in the is it Episode 1? Create a story.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
there's actually two. There's one that's the Episode 1 story, and then there's one that's like associated with it.
So whenever I was a kid, Disney used to do these like these publishing books, kind of like what you're talking about, except you could like order the book and you could have this character, and then you could make like, you could order it in and say, hey, I want this character's name to be my kid's name, and then you could give it to them as a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any Star Wars books like that?
The only ones I know are the Episode 1 books.
Okay.
Now you had like Choose Your Own Adventure books for New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, but those weren't really canon.
Yeah.
I mean, there were
S
there were
canon.
sort of N canon, S or N canon.
S or N, yeah.
What you think?
But would those books be considered, like, if there were ones like that? I don't know.
That's a good question, because I mean, they were part of the Episode 1 media blitz, like the media release and stories surrounding that. And all the other Episode 1 stories are expanded universe. So, I mean, it would be an anomaly for that not to be. But were all those storybooks intended to be EU? Who knows? Things like the I was just reading it the other day. Was it the mysterious droid or the dysfunctional droid, where the Jawas actually mess with the oil on Tatooine and make all the droids go crazy?
Yes, I remember that one.
Rebellious Robot. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
It's like the Jawa terrorist attack or something on Tatooine.
Goodness.
It's pretty wild. It's like paints the Jawas in a whole new light, where they mess with the oil on the droid lubricants. It makes all the droids go crazy. Pretty
Interesting.
wild.
That's fun.
They almost kill Han. Like they almost crash the Falcon because
imagine that. Imagine just going out like that. Man. Hello. Let's see. Was there anything else that we wanted to talk about whenever it came to should we care about Canon and what George Lucas thinks? I don't think we should. Maybe 10 years ago we should have, but nowadays he doesn't care, so we really shouldn't. There's plenty of interviews on, basically you could take any quote and have an agenda and go around it, but there's the hard interviews from people.
There's all quotes, and George changed his mind 100 times throughout the years. So you could find a quote of him saying anything from any which way, depending upon your perspective. I think in the end, you have to ultimately look at what happened, and the fact that we got these databank entries from StarWars.com showing all these characters, anybody from Kyle Katarn to the movie characters, like it was all sort of one. We have things like the Essential Guides. We have the Star Wars encyclopedias that came, over the years. So especially from the period like 1991 up till 2014, it was pretty clear anything with the Star Wars brand that came out, it was going to be a part of the EU, unless it's an canon or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's not rocket science. I mean, anybody who was around that time knows what actually happened. Now, canon in the post-2014 context means something totally different.
It does, yeah.
So
it's not the same. So if anyone's looking at this video for like a way to understand how canon works, the way it works now is totally different than then, because then there wasn't now there's not a hierarchy, then there was. And I think some of the hierarchy quotes people take as there was no consistency or something like that. But go ahead.
There wasn't consistency. There was a hierarchy.
Right.
The hierarchy was because there was no consistency in certain cases. I mean, there was consistency within like the novels that.
Right.
If you had Dark Apprentice was written on the precedent that Jedi Search existed. Right. So that's what we mean by canon, that there's an established storyline based on which all future stories take a direction with these stories as the baseline. So that's the common lore, which all stories, go in a future direction from. So that's basically what we're talking about with canon as it relates to the expanded universe.
Yeah. But yeah, George liked taking a backseat to things, and so it should be okay. But the main reason we made this video was, at least for me, anytime someone would say, talk about something EU, there'd always be someone that would be like, oh my gosh, did you know that it's not canon? And it's like,
what do you mean by canon?
What do you mean by canon? What do you mean by this? And then there's just threads with quotes.
What does George Lucas have to do with this, right? Because George Lucas sold the company 2012. Obviously, the EU continued after that. So it's like that kind of doesn't hold up.
Even going back then, like, why does it matter? Who cares?
Yeah,
just read a book instead of reading the quotes. If you read, just find something else to read. Then decades old quotes.
If you care, why do you care so much? Like, why is the EU such a big threat in this day and age? In 2014, 10 years after the decanonization, like, why are you going into EU groups trying to stir up trouble like this?
Or there's also the other side, the people that say, well, George Lucas always this is like, why do we care? Like, it doesn't matter. There's this hierarchy here that I just showed you. Um, just go by it. Why do we have to argue about it? Can we go back to when is Star Trek better than Star Wars? Like, can we go back to arguing that? Like, we don't need canon wars needs to stop.
Yeah, it ultimately doesn't matter now because there's no EU to argue over
Right.
anymore anyway. So
Right. Because if the EU got continued, there'd still be this fighting. Well, this wasn't approved by George Lucas.
well, then we'll take up the fight. Like when that
Right, I
happens,
guess.
okay, it'll be a fighting point. We'll discuss that as the time comes, but
Yeah.
not until then.
Do you have any final words to say before we conclude the stream?
No, I think that wraps up the topic. I think we might have another spicy topic for the next Comlink Chatter podcast episode. Yeah, we might take on supernatural encounters, which has also been a point of contention, but we'll discuss that topic another day, I think.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Yeah. Please like, comment, subscribe. Leave a comment if you're watching this again. If afterwards, if you have any topics you'd like us to discuss, kind of like this short one, which is kind of nice because taking 3 hours to go through a comic series, it can be a bit much, and so we like these quick conversations
that are more interactive. There's been a lot of comments on this episode in particular. So
very much
keep them coming.
Yeah, keep them coming. But thank you again for watching. You guys have a wonderful evening.